My name is John Bittner. I'm the Executive Director of the Small Business Development Center here in Alaska, and I have the distinction of being the least interesting person on this panel. That's all we'll say about that. So, to get us started off here real quick, I think the word innovation is thrown about kind of like the word zesty is thrown about in advertising. We all kind of think we know what it means, but I've never actually experienced anything that I described as zesty. So I'm not sure if my definition is the same as yours, or if their definition of innovation is the same as yours as well. Why don't we start this off by having each of you sort of describe what is innovation, what does that mean to you, and when people say that, what are you envisioning? Anand, why don't we start with you?
The way I think about innovation is primarily in terms of a mindset that is characterized by high intellectual curiosity. Really, it's a propensity to ask questions, all sorts of questions. How does this work? Why does this work the way it does? Is there a better way to do something? And I want to learn more. It's, to me, it's that mindset is what I would call innovation.
So for me, innovation really comes down to the human first. I believe that inside every single human being is the ability to make magic, like literally magic. You have thoughts, dreams, hopes, visions inside of you that are so unique to you that nobody else could come up with those. Because of the way that you were brought up, because of the way that you think, because of your experiences in life, there is a magic inside of every single one of us that needs to get out into the world. And so for me, innovation is when someone takes a step to get that magic out of them and get it into the universe and start creating something that either didn't exist or didn't exist in the current form moving forward.
Whoa, a little too close there. A couple of thoughts, maybe drafting a little bit off of Anand. Creating a culture or where the whole ecosystem kind of takes that level of curiosity, I think is key. A couple of other thoughts. One is a lot of times the term disruptive gets thrown around and something's not innovative if it's kind of not disruptive. I do not agree with that. I think there are many, many small forms of innovation that can take place across many parts of the ecosystem. It can be in your supply chain, it could be in how you market, it could be an innovative business model. There's probably a list of 20 things where innovation applies that could help shape business or help shape the ecosystem for growth. Maybe the last thing that comes to mind for me on an innovation standpoint, I was kind of studying this a little bit when I was new to CIRI, when we kind of think about change or growth or kind of innovation, and I came across a McKinsey study where they had done a fairly in-depth corporate innovation analysis, and one of the things that they found, or one of the takeaways, it was a year ago or so since I read this, but one of the things that was the takeaway is that innovation isn't come down from on high where somebody sprinkles some pixie dust and then there's huge shareholder value created because of some magical idea. What their analysis showed is that most of the innovation that is accretive to business value actually is generated by the line personnel that are actually doing the work, and they do very, very small little things that can add 1 or 2 or 3% to the bottom line. And when you put all of that together, that's what it takes to create a new business or make customers more happy. And it's not necessarily these big mega projects where they're trying to wholly shift the corporation that actually delivers that shareholder value. So, I think that spirit of little small seeds, of little small steps of innovation, I think is really matters.
Excellent. And so one of the themes in that is the individual, the power of the individual, and especially not just the Mark Zuckerbergs or things like that. It's the people that are actually trying to improve the efficiencies of what they're doing in small or large ways. I like that. So there is more commonality there. So to sort of continue on that theme of where we're at and the purpose of the panel, one of the things that they wanted us to talk about are how Alaska, or what Alaska should focus on in terms of innovation. Where does Alaska fit in this broader innovation sphere? What kind of innovation should we expect here, and what maybe isn't quite as reasonable? Or is there anything that isn't reasonable? Should we go for it all? Why don't we start at that end and work our way back for...
Tough one. What to expect, right? I think we've all agreed that there's a bit of a mindset that comes with that. So events like Accelerate Alaska, I think, helped create momentum where people start to think and embrace that culture. And I do think it's a culture. You can't kind of do it on your own. And then maybe one follow-on piece is, even if they're kind of individuals that are embracing small bits of change, it has to be supported from the top. If there are leadership within either the Anchorage or the Alaska community that are not willing to accept small bits of change or that innovation, then it's you just can't get momentum. But as it relates to kind of what Alaska should be focusing on, I might maybe draft a little bit off the Accelerate Alaska agenda a little bit, because I think they've done a nice job of creating these tracks and then getting like-minded people to be able to come together and talk about it. Maybe the last thought is just momentum, right? I mean, once things get going, there's kind of a force that is generated. If we don't start to create some momentum in whether it's food or transportation or logistics or kind of building off of the tourism momentum, it's really hard to kind of get things going. But once you get some momentum, there tends to be some community or ecosystem that comes around that. That's the only thing that comes to mind, John.
Nice.
So I have a slightly similar take, but slightly different in the sense that I really don't think there's a specific thing that Alaska should be focused on yet, in the sense that, we want to talk about tourism economies, or we want to talk about oil economies, or all these different things. And I think that, honestly, the truth is Alaska could focus on anything it wanted to and have a successful economy. Anything. We jokingly say all the time, Innovation Collective, I could take an entire community and focus them on the future of hair and make billions of dollars. I mean, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. Imagine a society where young people, from the time they're in school until old people who are in nursing homes, are thinking about the future of the hair product industry. How do we regenerate hair for people who are losing it? How do we make sure that the hair that the products we're using on our hair aren't causing damage to our Earth? And how do we use those things to imagine a society that's focused on anything? Hospitality, hair, space, anything. And I think that one of the things that you touched on that I think is very, very important is one of the very first things that Alaska should be focused on is the leadership that's going to actually say we're going to be focused on something in the future, rather than trying to hold on to ancient systems and ancient ways of doing things that have brought us where we are today, and all those were valuable. But they're not going to be the things that change and lead us into the future as technology changes and as democratization of that technology changes. So my answer would be, it doesn't really matter what Alaska focuses on, as long as there is a focus in Alaska and it's an authentic and genuine expression of the people who live here. And one of the things we did in Coeur d'Alene early on was we looked at the history of what went on there. And it turns out that we had this major manufacturing base there, and 4 different AI companies started in Coeur d'Alene back in the 80s, which sounds bizarre. In fact, one of the largest libraries of chatbots was just made public domain by one of the companies that started in Coeur d'Alene, now is in Spokane. And so we said, hey, with this history here, why wouldn't we focus a community on being a community of robotics and AI? And we'll do something different in other cities we work with, but for there it was an authentic expression of what had come out of there originally and what we'd always done there. And we were able to take that grit of North Idahoans like you guys have here in Alaska and go, can't we start doing something that is focused and create an entire research and development hub in a community that people from the outside want to take notice of?
As a bald guy, I'm 100% behind the hair innovation industry. I know this is Ross's party, but if we can just shift the whole focus
To hair.
I'm just saying,
I would be a client. Anyway, sorry, Anand.
no, I was going to start there. I would not have thought of hair, but hey, but I would agree with Chris. I don't know that I would have us as a state think about one sector or one industry or the other. I think innovation is much more broad-based than that. Take established businesses like my own company. We're a very different company today than we were a decade ago. And frankly, if we're not, I don't think we would be in business today. And God, I hope we are a very different company 10 years from now than we are today. Otherwise, we won't be in business 10 years from now. I'm not smart enough to know what that looks like 10 years from now, but all I know is it will be different. And I hope we have the people in the company at all levels who are willing to be part of that journey and of change. And I do agree on also the notion that disruptive innovation is few and far between. We like to focus on that because it makes for good storytelling. But the majority of innovation is really all the incremental change that happens every single day in our lives. Something as simple as a school teacher choosing to try out a completely different thing because her 20 kids in her class are responding in a particular way to a particular method of instruction that, has never been tried in the school before. Who cares if it's not been tried? It's working for those 20 kids. That is innovation, and that works. Startups, young companies that are starting their way around. I mean, there was some interesting statistics that were shown by Ross yesterday at the dinner for this event. As I understand, and I did not know this before, as I understand, we are number 3 in the country, the 3rd rank, in terms of entrepreneurship. But we are number 44 out of 50 in terms of businesses that actually thrive and grow beyond some initial period of time. So there's a pretty high failure rate. To me, innovation for those young, small businesses would be what are the business models that allow them to be successful? And it may not be the business model they start with. I mean, most startups change their business model half a dozen times in the first 2 years. To me, these are all artifacts of innovation. I was recently working with a company, young startup here in the area of cybersecurity, a company called Threat Informant. Pretty fascinating model as to what they have in play. We are actually starting to use them in our own company right now because I'm curious as to how that model will play itself out. Smart people coming together with a lot of good ideas. And I met the founder, talked to him, and said, what made you choose to set up your shop in Alaska? And he had this fascinating story about, well, he was here, and that certainly is important. But then he also, of course, found a bunch of people who, and he said it's hard to find, but there's talent hidden, and you just have to go find them and draw them. And he's now constructed, person by person, a company that has a bold vision. They're working hard. Ultimately, how their business model evolves, what their success is going to be remains to be seen. But to me, that's innovation. It could be in any other discipline. I don't think it matters. But I think all of us, large established companies like my own, smaller companies that are out there, we have to innovate. Because if you're not, someone's doing it for you and you won't be in business anymore.
So I want to sort of build off of what you were just talking about there for a second. I've often thought that, there's only 700,000 people here, right? So any market share we capture inside the state is, by its very nature, going to be difficult to scale if the state is the market. Does it make sense for us to look at where our pain point, like a lot of the innovation is driven by, problems or inefficiencies that you have locally, and cross-reference that or create a Venn diagram of what our pain points are and what other large-scale or emerging markets' pain points are, and see, hey, the healthcare situation in rural Alaska has some similarities to the problems they're having in India or China, or our providing transportation or logistics to services to a large geographic area with underdeveloped infrastructure. Well, we can think of other countries that have that issue. When it comes to food security, who else has these issues? And it may not be the markets that we necessarily associate with. India is in the middle of a very large-scale electrical grid upgrade, or at least they're trying to figure out how to do that, but it's a massive project, trillions of dollars to recreate the current system, whereas maybe a more localized microgrid system or some sort of hybrid system might make more sense, and we're kind of at the forefront of that just by our very nature. Is that worth looking at, or is it more that we should just let this happen organically? Is it an intentful trying to find that thing that we can do authentically, or where somebody at the top or some innovation community comes forward and says, look, this is the criteria by which we should filter our efforts, or is it just sort of throw everything against the wall and see what sticks naturally? And you guys, maybe you don't have something to say with that, maybe you do. Whoever wants to step up first, please do.
I don't know it's throw it against the wall. I also don't know that it's prescriptive, where someone or some organization can say, here are the criteria. Take threat informant, and Matthew, who started the company, he didn't do it because Accelerate Alaska told him what the criteria is going to be. He did it because there was a real issue that he's trying to solve, and he thought he had an innovative way of approaching it. And by the way, the market is, we cannot look at Alaska as the market. Even though you may be still focused on serving Alaskans, your customers don't have just the Alaska frame of reference. In this day and age, for example, take my own company, when we are selling services to our business customers, they're saying, well, this is what I can get from Ring Central or Vonage or Amazon or some other company who may or may not be doing business in Alaska, but they use that as a frame of reference because they've read it. And so why can't I get something like that? It's not good enough for me. There is no Alaska premium anymore. You've got to compete on a global basis. John, to your point, if you think about some of the innovation that's happening in our state, take ANTHC. Take the medical carts that have been built by ANTHC. I don't know if you've had a chance to take a look at it. If you haven't, I'd encourage you to go do that. These are these ruggedized medical carts with a whole bunch of medical instrumentation, field tested, that they have evolved over the course of 10 years, that get shipped out to the 200 bush communities we have in Alaska, that provide a way for the primary healthcare providers to offer primary care services, stabilize patients, connect them to doctors back in Anchorage or Fairbanks or wherever the closest doctor happens to be, and if necessary, send the patient over for the next level of care. But that's innovation, and that field-tested, ruggedized medical card is extensible to any village, anywhere in the world. How we, Alaska Communications, serve some of our remote communities. I know I cannot ship a technician there. Sometimes the day someone has an issue, I don't have technicians in every village. So I have these standardized configurations that are field tested, that we test and ship, and and we send 2 of them, so that one fails, here are the color-coded wires, switch it to the next one, and you're up and running before I can send a tech, and it may be 4 days before I can send a tech. But to me, it's not, there's no rocket science about it. But to us, it was a small innovation that allows our customer to continue running, even though I may not be able to send a tech there for 4 days. Or take our oil companies and the advances that they're making in telemetry and remote monitoring, and how they're able to bring technology in their core operations. That's innovation. And if that's done here in the North Slope, there's no reason why that couldn't be done in Norway or that couldn't be done in any other part of the world. So I think our frame of reference has to be much broader. You could start in Alaska, but for sure, in this day and age, know that your customers are comparing you with something, I saw this happen in China, why can't I do this here? And we've got to have that frame of reference when we get into this.
I agree. I agree with the points that Anand has made. A couple of things to add on to it. One is we have to recognize that sometimes I think folks feel like we're somewhat isolated or we're far away from everywhere else. That's both a blessing and a curse, because the world has changed. We're not that far away from the lower 48 or the rest of the world, but utilizing the somewhat isolation as a benefit is that it's a really unique opportunity as a small test bed to try something out that could scale very well in much bigger markets. We hosted some people last week, both a venture firm as well as a startup company who is attempting to offer a software solution for municipalities. And he left 3-4 days here in Alaska, and he was overwhelmed with, one, the enthusiasm for what he was offering, but also he was excited because we have a very unique small test bed where you can come in, you can test something out and be able to perfect it and then be able to scale it and grow. So homegrown technologies or homegrown innovation ideas, part of what Anand was saying at the end, I think, is really pivotal, because we have to think, or the mindset has to be that, is this solution something that can scale and grow? And then do we have the mindset to take the risk to be able to take venture money? 5, 10 million Series A and give away 50% of your equity, just as an example? Or is the mindset, I really want to have a lifestyle business where I can hike or I can ski when the snow falls, and I'm not necessarily sure that I want to wake up at 5 a.m. to take a phone call with the East Coast? Right? That's a mindset shift in terms of lifestyle business versus creating a business that's going to employ 50 or 100 people and can scale and service customers worldwide. Because the technology means that it doesn't matter where we're based. So, just a little bit drafting off a few of the points that Anand made.
And I agree with all of that, but I wanted to add back to your original question was, should this be something that some on-high institution comes in and says, this is what we will do, or should it be more organic than that? I would posit that, yeah, somebody has to make that decision in the sense that we have been doing it organically in society and communities all across our country, and we have to have conferences like this because of that. I mean, this exists not because everything's so hunky-dory here. There's a lot of problems people are trying to figure out here, not only just in Alaska and in Anchorage, but in Deloitte and in Casper, Wyoming, and all around the country, everywhere but the coast and the major metropolitan areas. We have this issue, and we've been trying to be organic as long as we possibly can, and until leadership steps up and says, here's the direction we're going to go. And part of the problem is human beings are designed to work within framework. And an example I use all the time is if I were to ask you guys to come up with a science fair project, everybody would come up with a volcano, right? It was all would be the first thing we would think of is the volcano. But if I were to ask everyone in this room to come up with a science fair project that a high school or middle schooler could do that revolved around mobility for the elderly, in 10 minutes you could all come up with 4 of them that are really, really cool. Because we are designed as human beings to think within framework. And that doesn't mean you can't ever think outside the framework. In fact, some of the greatest innovations have come from people who think outside the framework. But if we're talking about ecosystems and talking about building a culture here like you were talking about, it has to start with giving human beings some kind of framework with which in to think, because if you don't, they are thinking bigger. And just to kind of expand a second point on what you were saying, even using the phrase the lower 48 isolates you and is an us versus them mentality. And guess what? We live in a global society. The people in Pakistan have as much access to information as you do. And if you think they don't want to steal your ideas and innovate around you, you're sadly mistaken. A young lady was admitted to MIT last year, MIT, from Pakistan, who was robbed of the chance of an education because she was a girl. And so she enrolled in Khan Academy and entered into MIT as a freshman because she has the internet in a hut. If you don't think that you have global competition here and you're not thinking outside the boundaries of your state, you will tend to continue an attrition rate where people are going to leave, talent's going to leave, resources are going to leave, and the same things are going to happen here. And I'm not saying this because it's some weird threat, because it's Alaska. I watched this happen in communities in North Idaho. And we thought, man, we were pulling so much silver out of the ground. This is amazing. Guess what? Oil is going to stop being used as a primary form of currency in the world. It is. And if your economy is forever going to be based on the consumption of oil in China, what happens when electric vehicles take that over? You're looking at a huge crash. And so to answer your question, yes, leadership needs to do something. And it doesn't have to be the same thing for everybody. But someone at some point's got to go, hey guys, this is the direction we're going. Who wants to come?
Well, and that kind of leads nicely into sort of the next question I wanted to get into. So there's 2 sort of major institutions that I think of when I think of folks that have the resources but not necessarily the flexibility, the innovative culture, and that's the state government here, and to a lesser extent, the university as a whole. So these are large-scale institutions that I think could play a major role in this, but maybe not. And what does that look like in your mind? Like, is it their role to lead? Is it their role to facilitate, to support, to develop programs that help whoever ends up being the person to stand up and say, let's go this way? Why don't we start with you, if you don't mind, since you, Chris, if you did the...
I think the answer to your question is yes. There has to be public-private partnerships. It always has to be that way. And one of the things that is changing, and if the local, I'm not familiar with the local university here, but one thing I know that University of Idaho has dealt with is education is changing. I sat in a panel with a bunch of leaders from upstate New York who were trying to revitalize their economy there, and one of them said, we've got to get young people more information. And I about lost my mind. I'm like, no, we don't need more information. Every bit of information we've ever needed is at our fingertips right now. I was an IT professional for years, and people would be like, how do you know all of this? And I'm like, I Google it. I can't know everything. I just can't. And so we don't need more information. And so so when it comes to education, we have to be educating differently. And we have to actually be putting job-ready skills in front of people, which is the part of the problem with the current way that we do education in our society is learning and higher education institutions cannot fail. They cannot follow an entrepreneurial model, because the minute they fail, they have to admit they don't know everything. And if you're the keeper of all knowledge, then you can't fail and you can't not know anything, because then you lose credibility. And then who wants to go to your college when a professor stands up and goes, we don't really know how any of this works. So because of that, there has to be a partnership between private, public, education, and the government. The problem is many times, and this is another, and I'm presenting a lot of problems, not a lot of solutions, but there are some solutions we can talk about later. The way that government works in America is also flawed in this, because the majority of terms for local politicians and from the outside of the national level down. So you take governors, you take mayors, you take council members, all those things. Their impetus and their goal is to get reelected, and their goal is, I can't make too many waves, because if I piss off too many people, I won't get reelected. And that's not a reflection even on poor values. It's just the way the system works. So name the last time a mayor stood up and said, everyone in this town's going to hate me, but we're going to do this because in 10 years, promise me, you will thank me. It doesn't happen. And the reason is because we have to change the way that we elect officials, or we got to have some officials that can actually do something. How long does your congressional term here last?
On the state?
No, like how long is the actual Congress where they're actually like passing laws?
Oh, theoretically 3 months, realistically
It's 90 days in
eternity.
Idaho. So help me understand this. Why would I spend any time at all running for an office where I'm going to work 3 months out of the year for $40,000 if I actually have done anything successful in my life? What a waste of freaking time. And so if that's the way that we're going to operate, then yeah, there's got to be change in those things, or else we're going to end up with the exact same thing we've been getting for the last 50 years.
Of all the suggestions, that was not the most controversial. I think getting us to stop saying the lower 48 is probably the most impossible thing you've suggested so far.
I'm just a
Second
dumb
only to
tech
like
guy,
just
so
getting
I
rid
don't
of the
know the
PFD.
difference,
No, it's
yeah.
good. I like that. Sorry, Anand, I didn't mean to
No,
interrupt
I mean, I hear you, Chris, but of course, we are a democracy, and we will do the right thing after we exhaust all other alternatives. I'd pick a democracy over any other alternative any day and deal with with all the inefficiencies that comes with that. But be that as it may, to your point, John, and I had this written down to make sure I would not neglect saying it. We are moving into, we have been, but even more so, into a talent economy. And the first and foremost that we as a state or any society can do is invest in education. Education, education, education. It doesn't, from grade school all the way through advanced postgraduate degrees, wherever, whatever form that takes. We have one of our education leaders sitting in this room right now. We have Jim Johnson, a good friend of mine, who will be speaking at this event tomorrow. Our education leaders can and should innovate in terms of how they deliver their education and run their shops. But we as a society have to invest in that. That is, bottom line, you cannot compromise on education. From a state perspective, I'm a big proponent of us taking a hard look at technology and what technology can enable in our state. Those of us who read economic history, we may be familiar with the phrase robber barons. Used to be 100 years ago, they used to refer to the railroad guys as robber barons. All these financial kingpins sitting in New York as robber barons, right, 100 years ago. Well, it was interesting. I was reading the latest issue of The Economist the other day, and I saw this phrase used for the first time, data barons. But that's the world we live in today. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, there was no Facebook. Google wasn't what it is today. There's no Twitter. But think about where they make their money is data, is information. And data and information is power, data and information is money, data and information is what's driving our economy. And what drives this? Technology and technology talent. So to me, from a state perspective, to Chris's point, while I generally don't like things being prescribed, but on the other hand, as a state, a choice can be made. The policymakers in the state could say, we're going to pick technology as something that we want to incent, because technology is location agnostic. Technology is all dependent on talent. We'll need to find ways to attract that and seed that process, but there's got to be a conscious choice that's made. Now, those conversations are happening. In fact, a couple of months ago, a couple of our legislative leaders led this track at the Pacific Northwest conference. So people are thinking about it, but we need to put money where our mouth is. We need to put resources behind it and make it a policy priority. So the state does have a role. Just given my personal bias, I'd be a huge advocate for technology, but pick one, and make that a priority and focus. There'll be people who'll follow that. There'll be people who'll innovate outside of that framework. Good for them, more power to them, and then invest in education. And ultimately, that talent is what feeds this next generation of growth in our economy. And then, but at the same time, when the state makes that a priority and attracts businesses here, you're creating an opportunity for that talent to be here and work here versus get educated and leaves the state. And that's, we've got to, it's a two-way thing that's got to work, hand in glove with each other.
I was originally going to abstain from commenting on Juneau, but there's a human nature thing, I guess, that, I guess I've seen with my kids, and you see it in the workplace, and it's people usually don't do anything until they reach either a point of desperation or inspiration. And in the middle, people kind of tend to do nothing. And I guess as, just a commentary, the state does have a role. Agree with the panel here. Unclear to me whether we have reached a point of inspiration or desperation where we tend to do something different. Now, the only piece that comes to mind for me in the state's role on this is that we have this massive resource with the permanent fund that we seem to be languishing away, right? I'm not an expert in any way on this, but if there was some way that there was either some leadership or a point of desperation where we said, we've got to do something different here. It's not just about writing a check to everybody, because it's doing nothing, right? If that was leadership, or if that was at the state, or if we reached a point of inspiration where the vision was so awesome around technology or otherwise, we probably could really move the needle for the state. On the education piece, maybe the only point that I might add is there has to be public-private partnership here. People go to college because they want a job, right? We've got a huge assisted living, senior housing need that's going to be crashing in on the state here. We've got so many folks, approaching that age. We've got to figure out how to be able to employ more healthcare workers, right? Especially on the heels of what I think AEDC published, where there's plus 900 jobs in healthcare, right? What is the university doing to be able to, kind of fill that pipeline? Because it probably starts in junior high and high school. I don't know. I think there is momentum there, but everything I've heard is that the need is undermet. And I agree with Anand. From a technology standpoint, the folks that we hosted last week, their question was, why doesn't Anchorage have a half a dozen software companies employing folks? With a town of 300,000 people, you should at least have 6 software companies that are employing, a set of folks. And, I guess kind of part of the commentary and the discussion that we were having in there is, is the university spawning computer science and, software people that are staying in the state and, actually doing that work? And they were kind of relaying the Silicon Valley model just in terms of once you have that critical mass from a university standpoint, it's usually going to be the millennials that can take that risk where they can be paid $20K a year to try to innovate or do something new. It's usually not going to be the 40 or 45-year-old that can, kind of mortgage their kid's college fund in order to try to start a business. So there is a public-private partnership there, because I think the private corporations have to do a better job of maybe outsourcing some of our, work, for some of this locally. And I don't want to promote the only employee, kind of only do, kind of Alaska folks. At the dinner last night, somebody was talking about how somebody went to Seattle for some creative work when there were 3 firms here in town that could have done an equal or better job. So, there is a public-private partnership, and we have to, I think private corporations have to commit to hiring folks that are coming out of the university. And maybe have a to your point, we need to have a 6 to 10 or 15-year vision for what that is, so that we can fill that pipeline and then actually, get those people's jobs.
All right, so we are coming up. We've got about 5-ish minutes left, and I know I said we were going to do a Q&A, but I really want to end this on one high note, an optimistic sort of vision for the future. So forgive me, I'm terrible at this. But the last thing I want you 3 to talk about is, I'd like you to say what your vision of, all right, let's say that whatever hurdles, whatever barriers there are, we've overcome them. We've jumped into the innovation pool with both feet, and it's been successful. What does that look like to you? What does that mean for Alaska? Like, let's project it out 10, 20 years in the future, and everything went right, and we did exactly what we needed to do. What picture do you see in your head when you look at that? And you can be as specific or as broad as you want, but I mean, what does success here feel like? And we can start. Who did I start with last time?
I'll give it a little bit of a try. Probably some form of linkage or more communication, I would say, with Asia, just based upon our location. Some of that may have to do with, kind of tax-free trade zones with our port, or some things like we maybe figure out how to leverage that a little bit more. If we drafted a little bit on some of the themes around technology, there's probably some stuff in telecommunication that it could be done, as well as in the software space where there are centers of excellence here. And I'm not sure exactly what those are, but I like what has been done in Coeur d'Alene with robotics, right? I think you just hosted a robotics conference there where people were flying in. Who would have thought robotics in Coeur d'Alene, right? There's got to be some stuff for that here. Last thought is just based upon our culture and kind of the kind of pioneering spirit, something with food and or kind of there needs to be some local sourcing and how to be able to scale that. And I'm not sure how that evolves into something that's hugely innovative and becomes employs thousands of people for the state, and that gets exported. But last thought is maybe has something to do with kind of all the talk around the blue economy and leveraging hopefully something that's sustainable with the oceans. So those are themes, I guess.
I like it.
As an outsider's perspective, I would like to see Alaska become known as not just an overall ecosystem, but centralized hubs of excellence in specific things. It would be awesome to see communities like Nome and Fairbanks and Juneau be places that other parts of the world look at as that crazy place in Alaska where they're all focused on this crazy thing. Can you believe that? And that those communities, success to me would look like kids growing up in school and being able to understand that they don't have to go somewhere else to be successful and live out their dreams. They can do that right here. And they can make an affordable living here, and they can actually build something. And if they don't like it in Fairbanks, they can actually just go over to Juneau, because there's something there going on that is more along their likings. And if they don't like it there, they can actually go to Anchorage, because there's something even cooler there. And that the education system, that alternative education, and that all those things are working together to build an ecosystem of innovation here, that every single one of those communities go, here's where we're going, and we're building on a foundation that's still going to be here 25 or 30 years from now. The technologies that we're working on today are ones that you were talking about from the ground up, from their kids through elderly. I mean, I guess that would be it too, that young people and old people will be working together to build new technologies that didn't exist 10 years ago. That'd be amazing. That would be success to me.
From my point of view, it's really this translates into, I guess, an economy or an environment in our state that allows all our citizens to do well and to fulfill their potential. And ultimately, when our people do well and they feel good about the opportunity they have for themselves and their families, that's success.
I mean, Anand just planted a seed in my mind too, is Alaska's a destination place. There are things here that are unique to Alaska, and people will want to move here to be able to experience some of that. But we have to be able to create the other opportunities that, so that folks aren't just moving here for the hiking or the fishing and then leaving for 6 months of the year, right? So if we can fulfill Anand's kind of thought there, and then have people that come here that are somewhat like-minded and love it for all that it offers, that will be a momentum or a forcing function to kind of help us all grow and create that mindset.
Well, and on a personal level, I think that I agree with everything that all of you said. I mean, I think that really the key here, we are good at some things. We are innovative in some industries. We don't think of it that way. We solve local problems because we have to, because we have that pain point. It's more desperation, and we need to get more to the inspiration side of things, where we become a leader in whatever we want to focus on for other communities outside of Alaska, and I think that's totally doable, especially based on what I've heard here today. I want all of you to give a big round of applause to our panel here. They are fantastic. I really appreciate their feedback.